You're listening to Psych with Mike, and the most important way to support the show is to find us on YouTube and hit that subscribe button. So no matter how you listen to Psych with Mike, find us on YouTube, smash the subscribe button, and we really appreciate it. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike and Brett Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
And I'm Brett Newcomb.
There are a lot of issues. We've recently in a podcast talked about the concept of ethics and how that works. And there are a lot of issues that revolve around that. But one of the things that we found ourselves coming back to again and again was this idea of boundaries, and that you have to have boundaries. Hopefully you have good boundaries. And that's one of the things that is going to help any person be able to operate ethically, right?
Well, one of the major concerns in doing therapy is to teach clients how to have healthy boundaries.
Right. And if you don't have them as a therapist,
how are you going to teach it?
Right.
So you're in a field that's easily contaminated with boundary violations.
Well, we're in the month of November, and I know I have had this client multiple times. You have had this client who come in and say, it's going to be Thanksgiving, it's going to be Christmas, and I'm going to have to go to so-and-so's house, and Uncle Jim's going to be there, and Uncle Jim's, a perpetrator, and everybody knows this, but nobody will talk about it. So what's my position? What do I do? Because if I don't go, everybody's going to say, well, why are you messing with the family? If I do go, I feel like I'm being violated, and if I go and talk about it, then I cause a crisis.
Yeah.
And those are hard issues. That's an example of an issue that a client will bring,
right.
But you have to have those good boundaries as a therapist yourself, because you're modeling that for these clients in a lot of ways.
So one of the theories about counseling is that the client will present in the session whatever is going on in their life. Mm-hmm. Now, they'll come with a story, and when I was 5, this happened, and last year this happened, and when I had this job, that happened, and I always wanted this to happen. But in the story, they are also present as themselves in the session. Mm-hmm. And so their nonverbals and their editing and their behavioral presentation, as well as their verbal presentation, will become a microcosm of what's going on in real life. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important that you observe that to the degree that you can start to point out to them, this is what I'm observing. Mm-hmm. As you and I chat, this is how I'm experiencing you. And I have to know, am I getting it right? Does that resonate with you? Do you feel like I'm hearing you and seeing you well? Mm-hmm. And if they don't, then you discuss that. What am I missing? To explain it to me. Do you have the patience to work with me? I'll try to learn to see it that way if it's there. But if I don't see it, or if I continue to see what I think I'm seeing, how can I safely point that out to you? Can I say, I still think I'm seeing this, because, and then I have to be very specific. I'm seeing it because there's a muscle that pops in your cheek, or every time we get the word mom comes out of your mouth, you cut your eyes to the side and grit your teeth. Mm-hmm. So I interpret that non-verbally as some level of distress or anger, resistance, resentment to mom. Mm-hmm. You're telling me you're not even aware of it. You don't even think you're doing it. Mm-hmm. And I'll believe you. I mean, you're not aware of it. But if I think I see it, can I point it out to you? Mm-hmm. And if you do it the right way, they'll say yes.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. So then you continue to do that. And so over a number of sessions, if you're right and you approach it appropriately, they will eventually say, I'm doing that, aren't I? They'll start to recognize it themselves. And that's the point where you can make an intervention and say, how would you like to do it differently? What do we need to talk about we're not talking about? I had a client years ago that was so distressed with her father that she, after several sessions, was able to whisper, I hate him. She wasn't able to say it out loud. And we laughed about it later, but the initial time that she said it, she whispered it, and then she started bawling. So if you feel that way, that's going to impact the way you interact with your father and the rest of your family. So can we work through whatever it is that's making you feel that way? And it may be right or wrong. It may be factually grounded or not. but it's how you feel, and it's coloring the relationship.
Right. And I think that what you're building to is like what I'd been talking about with the example of going to the family gathering on the holidays is if how do you effectively establish and consistently uphold boundaries when all of your choices are bad?
Well, I try to get my clients to the place where I can say to them and they can believe, you have the right to choose to go.
Mm-hmm.
If you think that's important enough for reasons that make sense to you, Grandma's 92 years old, it may be your last Thanksgiving, I need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
For my reasons, I need to be there. But the room is going to stink.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be an odor in the room.
Mm-hmm.
You can go, but you can't let that contaminate you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go with enough boundaries and walls that at some point you say, okay, guys, it was nice seeing Grandma. Have a happy Thanksgiving. I got to go.
Right.
But you can't pee all over the wall. You can't ruin
Mm-hmm.
everybody's Thanksgiving. You can't create a family crisis. If you go knowing I'm choosing to dress up and wear my appropriate clothes
Mm-hmm.
and behave appropriately because I know this is going to be a bad place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you can't do that, don't go.
Right.
If you can do that, then you can choose to do that. But what you can't also do is go and set the house on fire.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here's one, and I'm not going to say that I struggle with this. I found myself going back and forth on this question over the course of my career. But where do you come down on gifts? Because it is, if you do therapy long enough, then you are going to at some point have a client who's going to bring you something.
well, that's a great question because they'll bring you like cookies,
Right.
or donuts.
Is that okay? But a pen's not okay, or a PlayStation. I mean, because people will bring you stuff, and people, and as a therapist, you have to make a decision about what is your boundary on that.
So you have to discuss you have to have your own boundary. Where do you draw the line? If somebody offers me a cookie,
Mm-hmm.
do I accept it? And a difference if it's a kid and an adult. If a kid brings me a cookie, the meaning behind all that is different than if an adult brings me a cookie.
Right.
But you can make yourself crazy. So my answer is driven by my perception of the person and the quality of the relationship, the duration of the relationship. At some point, if they're trying to gift me on a regular basis anything of value, of any level of value, then I want to discuss with them what's that all about.
Mm-hmm.
And go back to the thing about how you are in life presents itself in this session. Because if you're trying to do that to me so that I will like you or respect you or appreciate you or care about you, you're trying to do it to somebody else too.
Right.
So do you do that to other people? And you can say, I'm just trying to be a nice person.
Right.
I just think that's the right thing to do.
Right.
And that may be an accurate answer, and if so, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
But if that's not the underlying motivation, we need to get to a place where we can discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that you have to be able to do if you're a therapist is you have to be able to say, there's an elephant in the room and I need to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to do that. You have to say, who farted?
Right.
You know,
Right.
We're all sitting around here acting like we didn't know, but we all know, and we're all ignoring the fact that we know. Well, in therapy, the therapist is supposed to be able to say, somebody just did that.
Mm-hmm.
Who was it? What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, somebody take
what do we need to
ownership
know
of
from
it.
that? And so if it can come down to the question of gifts. We worked with a psychologist that had a client who was an airline stewardess,
Mm-hmm.
flew back and forth regularly to Hawaii, and they have a leather goods market in Hawaii that she would go to. And she and the psychologist were talking about leather purses and what have you. So the next session, the gal came in with a nice leather purse, and the psychologist was really all excited.
Yeah.
Oh, I got this beautiful purse. My client really loves me, and she brought me this purse. And we're like, you can't keep it.
Right.
Because, I mean, but it had some value.
Right.
It wasn't just a kid's purse.
Right.
So then she was offended, the psychologist, with us, but she went away and thought about it, and she went to her own supervision.
Right.
She came back and said, you're right, I can't keep it. So the line has to be drawn
Yeah.
by you.
And everybody has to have
Through your
that.
boundaries.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you a story. You know that I had a particular therapist for decades
Yeah.
until she retired,
Yeah.
whom you know well. And so I knew that she was getting close to the point where she was going to retire, and I was really having a hard time with it. And I built her an X-Wing model, which is from Star Wars, and put it on a base with, the Death Star on it and everything. And I took it to her, and because obviously I'd been doing therapy for years and years and years, I wasn't completely sure that I knew how she was going to feel, but I wanted her, it was important for me to feel like that she would have something that represented me after she left her practice. And so I took it to her and I said, I will not be offended if you don't accept this, but I built this for you, and it's not a lot of money, but it was something that I did, and it represents me, and I want to give this to you. And she very graciously accepted it and had it in her office until she retired. She told me that when she retired, she was going to have it in her home, and it makes me feel better to believe that is in her house. So I get it. I
Probably
get,
gave it to one of her grandkids.
She may have, and they may
Or
have
Goodwill.
Yeah, I mean, and which is fine.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
but
No, I get it.
But it was important to me, and so I get it. And so I try and remember that perspective when people want to bring me things, and try and make that decision.
But that works both ways, Mike.
Yeah.
I can remember clients that would say to me, I can't remember you after I go home. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember what we talked about. I'd like to tape these sessions so that I could listen to them over and over again. So that's always a challenge, because those tapes can be edited selectively and become damaging.
Or found by somebody else.
Exactly. But my general reaction was, yeah, sure, you can do that if you want to. Mm-hmm. But they would literally say, by the time I get home, sometimes I'm not even sure that you exist, that I haven't imagined you. I'm so overwhelmed by the stress in my life. So I would sometimes use what we call a transitional object, because in the course of therapy, there's an evolution from dependency to independence that I'm supposed to foster and facilitate. When you first come in and you're fragile and you're vulnerable and you need to lean on me, I want you to. But as we progress, I want you to separate out and learn to lean on yourself. But if you're in crisis, I'm going on vacation and I'll be back in 2 weeks. Oh my God, I don't think I can live through 2 weeks without you. What am I going to do? Then I would give them a transitional object. I would say, here's an ink pen that belongs to me. Take this with you. And whenever you need to ground yourself, hold my ink pen. And they would do that. Now, that wasn't a gift to them. It was a transitional object. And when I got back, I wanted my ink pen back. So I might do something like that. What you're describing is the reverse. You were trying to give her a transitional object by which she could remember you and recognize her importance to the contributions in your life. And you don't know how that ever ended because you resolved it in your own head. So that was the end of it. But if you're talking about gifts of value, I've got a vacation home in Florida.
Exactly.
Here's 2 weeks that nobody's going to be there. Why don't you and your family go down and stay in my place? Well, that sounds really good, and it would be really good, but it's unethical. So I have to decide, can I accept that? And I might say, well, I can't accept it, but I have this friend Mike who wants to go to Florida. Can he have it? And you could accept it, but not if it came through me. So I mean, so it comes back to a question about boundaries.
So is there a dollar figure in your head that you No.
It comes back to my assessment of the relationship and the degree of neediness and vulnerability that the client is experiencing. And what I might do is say, I will take this from you and keep it in my office and give it back to you when you're stronger. But if that makes you feel anchored to this place and to me, I'll take it. But I want to be really clear. I'm not taking this home, and it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you, and you'll get it back.
I think that's a really good way to handle it. So the thing where I've always struggled is, let's say somebody goes to Disneyland and they know that I love Star Wars, and they bring me back a magnet, that is of inconsequential value. I struggle with this idea. Should you say, no, I don't want that? I feel like, okay, is that a rejection of them? Help me understand that. What do you do in a situation like that?
If I understand it the way that you described it, I take it.
Okay.
And say thank you very much.
So that you feel like would be,
Yeah.
that's, so if it's of inconsequential value,
Yeah.
that's, and
It's
it,
just
and
a
it
message.
only has an emotional connection, is that different than if it actually has monetary value?
I had a client who was in the Army that was suicidal, and she gave me the bullets from her gun.
Oh, wow.
And she said, if you have these, I can't kill myself.
Yeah,
So I want you to keep them for me.
right.
So I kept them. I mean, I had them for a couple of years after she stopped coming to see me, and finally reached out to her and said, "Do you want these back now?" And she took them. But at the time, I laughed and said, "You and I both know you have more bullets."
Well, right.
And she said, "But those are the ones I would
Those
use.
were the ones in the gun.
So I want you to have them. That way you're keeping me safe while I'm not here." I said, "I can do that. Until you're strong enough to know that you're keeping yourself safe, I can walk that line." So you have to navigate the field. The field is a field of flux.
Right.
There is not a hard and fast rule or dollar value
Right.
or object definition.
So there's one more thing I want to ask you, and I know we're right at time, but
All right.
okay, so your client comes in and they say, hey, I've got this performance or whatever.
Yeah.
I want you to go to lunch with me. I want you to come see my performance, whatever it is. I want you to do something with me or be a part of something that I am doing. How do you feel about that from a boundary perspective?
Conflicted.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
We both studied Ericksonian hypnosis, and Erickson regularly did things like that, and recommended that you do things like that. And I have read his works, and I've listened to his presentations, and I've seen how that worked for him. I think it can be just fine and very therapeutic. But again, it comes down to how are your boundaries. I don't know about going to lunch with somebody or dinner with somebody, but like a marriage, or I had a client whose twin children, or her husband had died, and she had raised these children alone, and they were 12 or 13, and they were having a bar mitzvah and a bat mitzvah because they were twins at the same time. And she asked me if I would come to that. And I had actually seen the kids some as clients as well. So I was happy to go to that, or to a client's graduation or something significant like that. So it depends. I don't have a hard and fast answer to that.
And I think that that's the same conclusion we came to when we were talking about ethics, is that these are things that you have to decide as a practitioner yourself. If you are conflicted, it's always a good idea to get the opinion of a couple of other
Collegial
professionals.
supervision,
Yeah,
absolutely critical.
but there are no hard and fast rules.
Well, and people like us will argue how many angels can dance on the head of
Right.
the pen. You know, that ink pen was a Waterford. You
Yeah.
can't accept it. A Bic you could take.
Right.
A dozen Bics
Well,
you could take.
and I've seen some practitioners who have tried to have absolute boundaries, and I've seen that be problematic. I've seen that be something that I think is not helpful in some ways because it's too rigid. Rigidity is not,
not a
the
boundary.
friend of therapy. Yeah. So if you have questions about boundaries, again, Brett and I would never give you the right answer, but we
would know it, we
definitely,
just wouldn't give it to you.
Right. But we would definitely give you our opinion. So if you have questions about that, send them to us, psychwithmike.com. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike and Brett.